After you have your sleeve piece cut out, we need to transfer these dots onto our fabric. So what I like to do is in every dot, so I don't have to worry about any shifting, is just go ahead and place a pin before I even begin transferring. To transfer your dot, what you want to go ahead and do is lift up the pattern paper where you see that pin coming out. Go ahead and mark that with a dot. Then you want to turn your fabric over, and where you see the pin coming out on the other side, you can go ahead and mark that with a dot as well. And you want to repeat that process. Alright, next go ahead and grab your index card and lay out your casing. Alright, next you want to make sure that the wrong side is facing up. Take your index card. You're going to take this to your iron. What you want to do is fold up the edge to meet this 1/2 inch line. Then you want to take your iron and press. And you're going to do that all along this side. Then once you're done pressing up this side, you're going to do the same exact thing to the opposite side. And you're also going to take your index card and fold that in 1/2 inch and press that as well. So then when you're done, you should have 2 ends folded in looking something like that. Alright, after you have your casing nice and pressed, you want to go ahead and lay out your sleeve with the wrong side facing up so you can see the dots that you made. You want to take your casing and you're going to lay it. You're going to lay your casing on top. And then what you want to do is take the bottom edge of the casing and you want to match it up with each one of your dots. So just do one dot at a time, taking the bottom edge of my casing, lining it up with the dot, and I'm going to place a pin. Okay, then I'm going to do my next dot is here, so I'm going to take the bottom edge, line it up with that dot, and place a pin. Alright, if you have a little extra on the side, it's okay. Because we cut this casing out on the bias, it tends to stretch. But once we're done sewing, you can just cut off any excess that you might have and you'll be fine. Alright, now I'm going to pin the upper part before I sew. So I'm just holding it, making sure that it's laying flat. Alright, the first thing you want to go ahead and do is line up the edge of the casing with 1/4 inch seam allowance. My presser foot has a 1/4, so I can see it. If yours does not, just try to sew as close to the edge as possible. Alright, I went ahead and readjusted my pins that were going this way. I just repositioned them. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side, sewing a 1/4 inch or just as close to the edge as possible. Alright, next you can go ahead and take this to your iron and press it out. Now before you press though, if you used a fabric marker and it's showing anywhere, you want to clean that off before pressing, because I know my particular marker, once I press it, it'll settle into my fabric. So If that's the case for you as well, make sure you go in and remove any of your dots where necessary. Alright, next, go ahead and lay your sleeve still with the wrong side facing up, and we're going to narrow hem our sleeve. So grab your index card or your seam gauge, and I drew a 5/8 of an inch line. What I'm going to do is take the bottom edge, fold it up to meet that 5/8 of an inch line. Then I'm going to take my iron and press that in place. And then once I have a crease in there, I'm going to open it back up, fold in that raw edge to meet the crease, and then fold it in again, and that is going to hide the raw edge. Alright, now it's time to stitch our hem in place. Now I have some pins here because of the fabric that I'm using, it does not want to lay flat, so I have some pins to reinforce it. So I'm lining up the bottom edge with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Or you can take this to your iron and press it out. Now if you have any excess of your casing coming out on the sides, you can go ahead and trim that at this time. Alright, next we're getting ready to insert our elastic, but before we do, this is optional. So what I did was, my casing is here, and I'm looking at the right side of my fabric, it's facing up. And my two lines here, this is for my casing. What I did was I marked the halfway point with a line, because after I insert my elastic, I like to stitch again on top of the elastic to give it that extra ruffle effect. Now you don't have to do this, this is optional, I just like that look. And after inserting the elastic, it's kind of hard to find the midpoint because it's all bunched up, so that's why I'm doing it before. Alright, so for the elastic, what I did first was I measured my wrist, and then I just added an inch to my wrist. So my wrist is 6.5 inches, so I cut out a 7.5 inch piece. Next, go ahead and take your elastic, grab a safety pin, hook that on there, and on one end, go ahead and begin inserting the elastic in the casing. Alright, now once your elastic gets to that edge, don't keep pulling. We're going to pause. I'm going to pin that in place, and now I'm going to sew a zigzag stitch to attach this before I keep pulling to the other end. Alright, next go ahead and line up the edge of the casing with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're using a zigzag stitch. So you're going to sew forward, and then you're going to back stitch to the starting point, and then sew forward one more time. Alright, now that it's attached, we can keep going. Alright, once you get to the end, go ahead and take off your safety pin, and go ahead and take a pin and pin that in place. And you can double check, make sure that your elastic hasn't twisted inside. So just go ahead and feel it. Okay, now let's go stitch that down. Alright, now we're on the other side. What you want to do is go ahead and the gathers here that have started to form, you want to go ahead and move those out of your way as much as possible, so that we don't have a lot of bulk in our seam. So I'm lining up the edge with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm using a zigzag stitch. So I'm sewing forward, back stitching, and then sewing forward one more time. Alright, after your elastic is attached, you can go ahead and pull your sleeve in opposite directions to distribute your gathers evenly. Alright, next we're getting ready to stitch on top of our elastic, but before we do, right on the side, in the side seam area of the sleeve, you just want to pull it out of your way a little bit. This will also help to decrease the bulk. Alright, to sew on top of my elastic, I'm using a narrow zigzag stitch. Just to get it going, I'm going to just start sewing. And then after I get it going, I'm going to begin pulling my sleeve in opposite directions to stretch out the elastic. And I'm stitching right on top of the line that I made previously. But if you didn't make that line, just be sure to stay in the middle of your elastic. And you want to make sure that you're pulling in both directions to feed the sleeve through. Alright, next I went ahead and attached my sleeve using the flat sleeve method. And then now I'm going to pin it up similar to how I did here. So I've already pinned this side. I'm going to sew, and then when I get to the elastic part right here, I'm going to stitch this up using a zigzag stitch. Here I am sewing up my sleeve using a regular straight stitch, and I'm using a straight stitch until I get to my elastic. Once I get to my elastic, I'm now changing to a zigzag stitch, and I am sewing over my elastic. This section can get quite thick, so guide that elastic through your machine. And then when you get past the elastic, you can go ahead and switch back to a regular straight stitch. Alright, the last step is to finish off your seam, press it out nice and neatly, and your sleeve is finished. Now this is the inside of my sleeve. I went ahead and used my serger to finish off the raw edge, and as you can see, my elastic is nicely hidden inside of the casing, very clean on the inside. Alrighty, that concludes the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you're not following me on Instagram, go ahead and follow me at Montoya Mayo. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions. Feel free to ask me. Alright, until next time.